tuned in to Inside Lowell. Inside Lowell podcast brought to you in part by Washington Savings Bank, serving the greater Lowell community for over 130 years. Make the switch now to Washington Savings Bank. Unicare, offering a variety of plans for people insured under the GIC. At Unicare, your health is their top priority. Reverie 73, Lowell's #1 cannabis shop. Elevate your cannabis experience at Reverie 73. Hafner's, heating and cooling homes and businesses for nearly a century. Become a part of the Hafner's family. It kicks. Boston North Company, offering a wide variety of business solutions to help restaurant and retail clients save money. Boston North. And by Mahoney Oil Company, providing warmth and protection to families in Greater Lowell and Southern New Hampshire since 1925. That's Mahoney Oil. And now, time for another Inside Lowell podcast. Inside Lowell. If Lowell is your home, this is your place.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another Inside Lowell podcast. I am your host, Teddy Panos, coming to you from the Inside Lowell studios here in beautiful, historic downtown Lowell. Got a special guest joining us this afternoon. We're recording it on Wednesday afternoon, November 15th. I believe that's the date. Don't hold me to it if I'm wrong. But he's a man with an awful lot of responsibility because in his hands is the future of this city in many ways. He is the Lowell School Superintendent. So we're going to talk to him for our first time here on Inside Lowell. Certainly looking forward to that discussion. But before that, I want to thank all our sponsors. You heard some of them mentioned there at the show open for helping to make this podcast, all of our Inside Lowell podcasts, and Inside Lowell in general possible. We certainly appreciate their support, and we also appreciate your support for tuning in or reading our different articles or checking us out and following us on social media. You folks are a big part of our success as well. As we like to say, Inside Lowell, if Lowell is your home, this is your place. And with that, turning my attention to my special guest joining us in studios, his first time here, almost 4 months into the job, and you've done a great job of ducking me up until this point, Superintendent Liam Skinner. How are you, sir? Welcome.
I'm very well. I'm delighted to be here. Appreciate the welcome, delighted to have the opportunity. It's your reputation precedes you, Teddy, and so I'm delighted to have this opportunity and be happy to talk with you.
Yeah. Actually, and I was joking when I said you've been ducking me because ironically, we've never spoken or met, and we finally got to run into each other at your school, the Shaughnessy School, a couple of weeks ago, celebrating one of your teachers as part of our classroom quarterbacks ceremony that we did with our friends at Unicare. So it was great to meet you, and you were actually enthusiastic about setting up a time to come in here. So I hope you're as enthusiastic when we are done with this session.
I'm likely to be. And it was actually, if I may say so, it was fitting that we met at an event to celebrate a teacher. At the core of what we're about at Lowell Public Schools is supporting teachers and celebrating teachers and helping them to be successful. So that was a great start for you and I, and so I'm delighted to talk about that and anything else you have on your agenda today.
Well, we got a lot, and one of them is just that right there. At your core, you are an educator, and you've been on the job now. It'll be close to 4 months at the end of November, but I was chatting with somebody about you, and I said, how's he doing? What, because this person's worked through a number of superintendents. And their response to me was, well, he's a career educator. He's going to have to learn how to be a little bit more of a politician. I'm just curious your reaction to that as somebody who's spent your life in education. Does it surprise you how much politicking is involved in what you have to do, and how much is involved in your day-to-day function?
Wow. That's a really big topic and open questions. So let me say that I absolutely love being an educator. I feel very grateful for the career and the life and career I've had in education, and I feel as though in each position I've been in, many years as a school principal, assistant superintendent after that, and now an opportunity to be superintendent, that I want my work to speak for me. I want the results to speak for me, and I want the relationships I have with the different people I work with to speak for me. And none of that has involved politicking to date. I do recognize, yes, I recognize that in this role, there's a lot of at least contact with politicians, but I still feel that I don't need to be political. I need to do the work. And I feel strongly about that. And then I want the politicians or anyone else, school committee members, to judge me on the work. I think they should, and I think that's my role. So I still feel I do not need to be political, other than being respectful to all members of the community and the school committee included.
It's difficult enough to have one boss, but technically you have 7. Right? It's impossible. What was that they say? You get 2 people in a room, you get 3 opinions. You've got 7 politicians in a room with you, so probably have 18 different opinions there. How do you adjust? Not because you've just assumed the helm, but before that you had bosses and you worked under people. Hard enough to work under 1 people. How do you operate under 7?
It's not so difficult, I find. So my attitude towards it is that I'm going to listen to and be guided by the direction that the school committee members set forth for me. I have an opportunity, I think part of my role as superintendent is to provide some guidance and direction to the school committee. I am happy to do that. I'm not shy about my opinions and about what my guidance for the school committee. But ultimately, and this goes to the fact that different members of the committee may differ with each other, and you may get all those different opinions in the room. I respect that in that they are representatives of the people who voted them in. And as part of the process we have called democracy, and I love it, and I think it's fitting. And then for me, being someone who needs to listen to those bosses and they have all those different opinions, it's the will of the body. They ultimately vote on a motion, they vote on a particular direction they want to go on, and then the will of the body becomes really clear, and my direction is clear from that.
Is there a predecessor, somebody who in your 30 years of working for the schools who you kind of look at as a superintendent and are trying to model yourself or pattern yourself after?
So yes and no. So I feel strongly that I've been really fortunate to have had many predecessors who have great skills, and so it goes back to the days of George Sapasaris, a man I loved. He's left us, right? But so George Sapasaris hired me as a principal. Was a very straight shooter, was a terrific superintendent. I've worked for Carla Bear for 8 years, for Jean Franco, Salat Alfawi, Chris Godden. I'm mixing them all in and out here. But in each case, I feel most of those leaders brought something, and I've been able to, I hope, pick up the best from each one. And I don't doubt that Liam Skinner, hopefully if I have a long enough career, I don't doubt that strengths will become evident. And then there'll be pitfalls, or there'll be some issues. I'm not going to be Mr. Everything, right? But that I'd be able to learn from my predecessors and bring the best forward of inside Lowell thinking, people that came from outside thinking. I think I've got the advantage and the benefit of a lot of good predecessors and a lot of role models to follow.
That's an interesting answer, because there's a lot in there. It shows how long you've been there. You mentioned George Sapasaris hired you, and he was really the last of the long-term superintendents in Lowell. When you compare it to surrounding communities where people have been around for decades, Carla Brooks Bear got 8 years, but it seems like since then the tenures keep getting shorter and shorter. How much of that is the job itself and the requirements and the strains it puts on the people who are holding that job?
I suppose it's a lot of it, Teddy. I think, though, if I think only about Lowell, we miss some of the context for that question. Outside of Lowell, the same thing is happening. I believe the average tenure for a superintendent in Massachusetts, it's something like 2.8 years. It's less than 3 years, the average tenure. So Lowell is no different from other communities in that respect. I have been a long time in Lowell. I've learned a lot. I believe in what we're doing, and I believe I can be beneficial to our community. And so I'll put myself forward as the next long-term superintendent for the community.
From your lips to God's ears, as they say. What surprised you since taking on the position? Is there anything that you've realized that, this isn't what they told me it was going to be?
What surprised me most, and in a pleasant way, is the number of community organizations doing good work in Lowell and with whom we can collaborate. I feel we've got a lot of partners. So when I was a school principal, I was all about my school and advocating for my school and helping the school to grow. When I was assistant superintendent for schools, I wanted to help each individual school and so on. Now, as looking at it from the lens of superintendent, for the first time, I'm looking at the broader community, and I have been able to meet with and partner with, literally dozens of individuals and organizations who represent, poor people in our community, different language groups in our community, youngsters in different respects. It's really a wholesome outlook in terms of partners and people who are looking to make Lowell a better place for folks to live in.
Some might call that a curse, that you have a bunch of organizations that expect certain things and you've got to kind of appease them while also keeping your eye on the ball, and that is that, your job is to do what's best for the Lowell Public Schools. Do you find that at all to create any challenges or conflicts?
I don't, and at least not yet. Ask me in the future, maybe. So far, what I found is that many of the groups, and I hesitate to mention them by name because I'm going to leave some out, right? But if you think of CTI, Project Learn, UTech, Youth Build, CBA, and it goes on and on, CMAA, and so on, right? There are partners there who need us to be more supportive of their work for good reason, because they're supporting people in our community. But many times there are partners who will dovetail really nicely with the work that we're trying to accomplish in Lowell Public Schools. So we're going to devote most of our attention to collaborating with those partners. And it has not become cumbersome or a burden in any way. It's so far only been an add-on.
All right, let's hope you still feel that way when your days are done there in the Lowell Public Schools. What's your vision for the Lowell Public Schools? How do you see them today, and where do you want to take them?
So my vision for Lowell Public Schools is to develop what I call a culture of continuous improvement. So this goes back to my days as a school principal. Some of that work was not pretty, and not everything that I did was a success, and not everybody would agree with moves that I made. However, in general, Teddy, and this is back to my days as the daily school principal, teachers at the daily school feel as though they are never finished improving. They're never finished making their lessons more engaging for students. They look at data sets, for example, and whether good or bad results, they look at them to figure out where the results were good and why. And they look at them and say where they came up short and why. And then they tweak and they make adjustments. That's a culture of continuous improvement. Principals, administrators in schools that have a culture of continuous improvement provide supports for teachers. Basic one might be giving them time. All the social studies teachers in grade 6 should have an opportunity to talk and plan together. That kind of support. They are visible in classrooms to provide support to teachers and so on. So building a culture of continuous improvement is what my vision is for the city, for the school department, so that we have that attitude. Another part of that, it takes time to establish, but part of my vision, that we each as individual adults take responsibility for students to learn. And that means when we look around and we say old habits and old sort of attitudes are, well, I'll help that kid when he shows up in my classroom and has all his homework done, right? Mm-hmm. What if the kid shows up and he didn't have his homework done? What if the child, came from a home where there was difficulty the night before? What if the kid doesn't show up for school at all? Am I still responsible? Yes. We have to be responsible for the students and to get them where they are and to take them from where they are and to take it upon ourselves to say, I am going to help this kid be successful to meet certain standards in education, and I'm going to figure out how to support them to get there.
It's the right goal, right? Continuous improvement, because no matter how great you are, you can always improve, right? Your best athletes say this, you're best at any craft. And yet when you're overseeing a system this big with, what is it, 26, 27 different school
28,
buildings. 28. There you go. I lost one along the way. And there's people pushing for you to acquire more property, by the way. But it almost feels like sometimes you're playing whack-a-mole, right? I've been interviewing superintendents long enough to remember when we were at a crisis point at the Merkland and I believe the Stocklosa school. So many resources were poured in there, and we started moving those schools in the right direction. And yet others that previously were thought to be, oh, these are the schools you want your kids to be in, and all suddenly they're now struggling. Is it possible? Is it possible to maintain a system that big and have all different buildings and components of it continuously improving?
Absolutely. And that's our goal, right? That's our drive, that's our duty, to produce a system where all schools have the supports and the capacity to grow and improve the education of students in them. You mentioned the Merkland School. It's a great case in point. A school that was struggling, that people took a look at, that the staff in the school themselves, with the help of some really smart and strong leadership, dug out of the trouble that they were in. And I happened to be at the Merkland School yesterday morning. It's been the best part of my week so far. I was in classrooms with the principal and a couple of others. And it's a joy to see the work that's gone on in the classrooms. And it's very convincing that the types of instruction that involve all the students participating in those classrooms is what will make that school successful. It's what has that school being successful. Is that possible across all the schools in the district? Of course it is. We know what it takes for schools to be successful. We know what it takes for students in a classroom to be engaged. And that's the work. That's what we're duty bound to provide.
Okay. Some lofty goals, right? Continuous improvement across a giant school district that is, 14,000, 15,000 students,
15,000.
Somewhere in between. How do you implement your goals and your vision when right now you're only there for a year, right? June 30th, if the search process for the next superintendent doesn't end up with you being selected as the permanent one, and you're just there as a one-year interim, how do you lead this system with that kind of, I don't want to say hanging over your head, but knowing that, a lot of what you hope to implement is going to take more than a year to bear fruit, right?
Teddy, I love the work, and I feel more motivated in my work today than I have for years. I can talk back and give you a little bit more detail on that if it comes to it. But there's a lot to be done, and I'm motivated to do it. I don't think from day to day about being interim versus being a permanent superintendent. I tackle the work because it's there to be done. And I believe ultimately that I'll be judged on, not the results of what will happen in 3 or 4 years from now, but on my work this year so far. If the school committee and the community see fit that I be a permanent superintendent, I would be delighted with that. If that were not to happen, I will respect that decision as well. I think the school committee has to do what they believe is best for our community, and I respect that. I don't think of it day to day. I think about the work, and I'm motivated to do that work. And I guess in its response to your prompt, I do the work in just the same way I would do it if I were a long-term superintendent.
You want to stay on, right? You've been clear that you would like to get that job on a permanent basis, or as permanent as any Lowell superintendent can be. How do you fight the natural inclination to kind of go full steam ahead with the things that will show positive results quickly, as opposed to the ones that maybe can be put off because you won't bear the fruit on those for a while?
I don't wrestle with that, funny enough. I don't wrestle with it. I get on with the work. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We believe that one of the ways to support the kinds of things we want to happen in classrooms is by developing instructional leadership skills among the principals, assistant principals, and other leaders in schools. We're doing that work. We had we have a once a month forum called Leadership Academy that I was fortunate enough to design and be a big part of in the last couple of years, and have remained a part of in my work as superintendent. That actually was going on for principals yesterday, and part of why I was at the Merkland School visiting classrooms with some leaders. It's going on for assistant principals today. That kind of work has not been held up, or it's not like, well, I'll wait to see what happens next year. No such thing. There are efficiencies that we absolutely need to achieve at central office. We're on and doing that work, whether I remain the permanent superintendent or not. We're going to take this first steps with that work this year. We've already taken them and are in the process continually of finding efficiencies and perhaps reorganizing and restructuring central office to be even more efficient on behalf of the schools.
I love it. You're naturally taking me where I want to go with my next questions. I want to shift into some specific issues, and let's talk efficiencies. Sure. I understand the schools are currently undergoing a financial audit, correct? Are the school finances in good shape? Are they stable? I know there's a huge influx of, it's called ESSER money,
that's right,
if I remember, from COVID, but that's going to dry up pretty quickly. Is the school in a position where it can continue to go on providing the level of services it has for the last couple of years with this extra COVID money, or are we going to have to see some kind of scaling back when that money disappears?
Okay. So you're right. There's a lot in that question, Teddy, and so bring me back to any part of it that I skirt. It was not intentional. The first part is that I can't predict today, just now, I can't predict what the budget will be like in the spring. It's true that we're going to lose ESSER funds. As I speak with you, we have relatively little ESSER funds left to spend, but the remaining ESSER funds will be gone. That's true. It's also true that we are very fortunate that the state has seen fit to rewrite the formula for how urban districts like Lowell are funded, and we have received more funding through the Student Opportunity Act, and will receive more again this coming spring. This minute, I can't predict just how that balance will weigh out, but so I can't predict the budget for next year. But I can tell you that we're prepared for it, and that we will be prepared for it.
One of the criticisms of your predecessor, Dr. Joel Boyd, was that his administration became top heavy. And in the many times I interviewed him, he would explain that, listen, if we want to go in a certain direction, you have to put that infrastructure in place. And the teachers in the classroom and everybody in the classroom needs the proper support from up above. How do you respond to people saying that the administration, school department and the administration is top heavy?
I'm open to it, Teddy. I'm open to the idea that, so first of all, what's important ultimately is our support for what happens in a classroom. It's not important per se that we build a certain structure as central office. What's important is that we provide schools what they need. We provide for teachers in classrooms and other classroom staff like paraprofessionals to be really effective in the work they're doing with our youngsters. That's what's important. To achieve that, so for example, to be efficient and nimble about hiring people to replace those folks who retire, we need to have a hiring office, a central office. We need to have a budget office and so forth, right? So those offices and those functions are absolutely necessary to support the schools. To what level should they be funded, and should we have? That's something we're actually undergoing a review of as we speak. Okay, that's something that's part of, I feel, my remit this year is to look at the central office structure and see what all is required. If we've added positions, is all of that necessary? And is it actually leading to better outcomes? Terrific. If it's not, what should we adjust? And by the way, I don't feel like that it's my remit for sure to tackle that question, but I don't want to do it and take it from just what's in my head. That work should be done collaboratively with our school leaders, asking them what we need, with our teaching staff, with all of the folks in our community. What sort of central office structure do you believe in, and do schools need to help them be successful?
That's a fascinating answer. Just to reinforce, if I heard correctly, I asked, is the administration top heavy? And you said you're open to that? Is that?
What I'm open to is, and what I've said from day one, when I visited schools on orientation day, I've said to teachers in the audience, paraprofessionals in the audience, and to school leaders, what do we need to do at central office? What improvements should I, as a new incoming superintendent, be considering that you all need in schools in order to be successful? So in other words, I'm open to their feedback. They gave it to me, and we gave surveys and so on, so we have plenty of feedback recorded. If we look at our central office structure, and if we decide to reorganize, and it'll be a collaborative process, but it will be to provide the services that those teachers, paraprofessionals, leaders, and school committee members feel that we ought to provide to our schools.
All right. What's the biggest challenge facing the Lowell Public Schools today?
There are any number of challenges. If you want the biggest, I guess I would say there are issues related to, bluntly, poverty. So folks that don't have what they need in their homes and in their communities to engage as productively as we'd like them to in schools. Perhaps we're going to receive some new immigrant students. That type of, it's referred to as churn, is difficult to cope with. Each and every one of the students, by the way, whatever their background and whatever their needs are, we can provide for. But you'll see it, Teddy, that in any one of our schools, if you track the progress of students, even the most needy students, who've been in a school for, say, 4 years of middle school, grade 5, 6, 7, 8, you will see decent progress. Where we lack and what we have difficulty with, if different students are in and out of our schools through grades 5, 6, 7, and 8, or in an elementary school, for instance, that's the biggest challenge. Students who are mobile and transient and new-coming students at all points in the school year. Not like our traditional schools. When we went to school, the teacher began the first day of school and setting out some procedures and rules and so forth, and got into the curriculum, and you taught the students in front of you from day one to the end of the year. But what about if there are new students right along the way? How do you incorporate them? How do you reach them and meet their needs? That's our biggest challenge. Is
that what is causing one of the things that I see as the biggest problems, and that is academic achievement being where it should be? Do you believe that our students are achieving as well as they could be in the Lowell Public Schools?
I've always felt antsy, not satisfied with student results, even in the best of cases. In the best of, in the very best, very fine teachers that I've had the privilege of working with through my career, the best of those teachers who got the best results never felt satisfied. And so, no, I'm not satisfied with our results. We're looking at our results. And by the way, I do believe that it's fair that we be judged, that the superintendent be judged on results. It doesn't matter that I don't know how I'm doing with your interview today, Teddy, but it doesn't matter how good a speaker I am or how good a politician I am if it comes to that. What matters is the results for students. And I think we should all be judged on that, particularly maybe the superintendent of schools.
Okay. To that end, some of the statistics, and to be fair, COVID created problems throughout the state, the country, and probably the world in terms of kids falling behind, especially the kids at the key point. But even before COVID, 2019 data showed that well over half of Lowell's school students could not read to third grade level. Something that's been impressed to me is the key point. If you can't read to level by third grade, you're chasing. You're catching up your entire career, and it starts to affect your math work, your science, and everything else. Why is that the case? And is that simply a function of what you said? You're dealing with a lot of poverty issues. You're dealing with a lot of churn. You're dealing with a lot of, because of the nature of Lowell being an immigrant city, a gateway city, you're dealing with a lot of English language learners that you got to get into the system for a long period of time before they can get up to speed. How much of it is that? And how much of it is mistakes that have been made in the past in Lowell?
I want to answer your question, but it dawns on me to highlight something before I do, that ultimately students in Lowell who graduate Lowell High School do very well. And so I don't want to forget that as part of the mix. And students who graduate from Lowell High School go to colleges, go into careers, become mechanics and doctors, and so that my own boys, my three sons went to Lowell Public Schools and did very well. I'm very grateful for the education that they received. So there's that I wanted to highlight. There are students who are being very successful. For the students who struggle the most, going back to what you said about grade 3 reading, I think it's useful, by the way, to pick markers. If we're talking about my notion of continuous improvement, that could seem very nebulous. Well, you should pick some benchmarks to judge yourself by, and we're doing that in Lowell Public Schools. The one about third grade reading is a recent one. I buy into it. In other words, if students don't become proficient readers by grade 3, they're going to struggle from there on out. To get at that and to address that, we need to address the needs of students from the youngest that they are in Lowell Public Schools, so pre-kindergarten, and we need to address their needs before they even come to us at that point, from birth. We need to provide services for families, and this comes down to our work with partners like CTI, who help us to work with and to provide for the needs of families who otherwise wouldn't have supports to, for example, provide books to kids, so that students in all families have access to books from a very young age. They come into kindergarten being able to flip through books even if they can't read. They're familiar with the concept. They even like the idea and are motivated to want to be able to read. They maybe know some of the alphabet and so on. We need to reach students at the youngest possible age, even before they come to us. That's part of the answer to the question. And then in our schools, if we have a target, for instance, a really useful target, that our students will be proficient readers by grade 3, we need to get after it from day one and assess how they're doing right through. So if a student by grade 1 doesn't have the phonemic awareness, or doesn't have know their letters, capital letters, lowercase letters, and all the rest of it, we have certain assessments at certain points where we get after it and we then reteach and intervene where students don't have what they need along the way.
Is there enough time in the school day to teach the basics, the reading, the writing, and the arithmetic, the 3 R's, as you and I grew up being told about it? And to be fair to your teachers, what I see is that they're spending an awful lot of time having to be parental figures, father or mother figures, role models, having to some degree be some type of emotional counselors as well. And I know you have staff, but it just seems to me that teachers spend an awful lot of time doing those kind of things as well. Are there ways to kind of offer other services, not in the 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. as, the 6 hours of school time? Are there ways to offer that through some of your partners instead, and let your teachers really focus on, that reading time and that math time in the classroom itself? Yes.
It's essential, Teddy, that we offer additional services beyond the school day to meet some of the needs that you talk about. When I began as a teacher, 100 years ago, I taught grade 7 one year, and a neighbor commiserated with me because grade 7 is so difficult, and students in their adolescence and so on. The most difficult grade levels to reach these days are kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, and kindergarten and first grade. In large part, because from the pandemic times, our students are coming to us now with less social skills than they used to have. Mm-hmm. And so you're right. Those teachers who are so dedicated and work so hard and want to get right into academics are also teaching social skills. They're also, in one way, shape, or form, remediating, mental health concerns or social emotional concerns with their students. And so it's distracting. If I go back to that other concept about the amount of time, traditionally in our schools, we have 3 major variables. There's the curriculum and how much students learn. There is the time that we allot for different subjects, and there's the amount of support that we give students to get there. What we've accepted in education for far too long is that the amount of time available for your math class, for instance, or for your reading class is a set amount of time. The amount of support we give students, whether there's one teacher or there's a teacher and a para, is roughly the same for all students. What's different and what we allow to be different is how much each student learns. That's been acceptable. We need to shift to a model where we want all students to learn to a high level. It's not only necessary, it's not only wishful thinking for Lowell Public Schools, it's necessary for, not to speak too highly, but the success of our country. We need to get all students to learn at a high level. That needs to be the standard, and the amount of time involved shouldn't be standard, shouldn't be contained. So we have to find additional time and additional supports for students, yes.
I don't want to make you get too political here, but I'm going to. That's a criticism I hear an awful lot, especially over the last 3-4 years. There's been a movement to lower the standards, to eliminate, you see this across the country, to eliminate some top achieving programs. And there's been some talk about the Latin Lyceum through the Lowell schools as well. Dare I say, I hear you saying, no, the goal should be to get more kids into those accelerated programs and those top levels rather than lowering the standards so that those who are needing to catch up can at least get to a competitive level?
Absolutely. I'm going to address the point, Teddy, by referring to expectations. If you expect a child to be responsible or to be respectful, to say yes, please, and no, thank you, and so on, if that's expected, believe it or not, kids will comply. Kids will get there. Same goes for education. Of course, it's much more complex. Of course, it's not simple. But if we expect students to achieve and to learn, they do get there. If we drop algebra, if we fail to promote our Latin Lyceum and support students to get there and to go into advanced placement courses and to be able to read by 3rd grade, if we drop our standards with that, the students will meet those expectations too. We have absolutely got to continue to have high expectations of our students' achievement and of our ability to get them there.
All right. We are chatting with Lowell School Superintendent Liam Skinner, his first visit here to Inside Lowell. Getting pretty deep here. We're 35 minutes into this. I promise we'll wrap it up in just a little bit, especially for you. But a couple of final questions here for you. First, you talked about you're going to be having an influx of students, or might be having an influx of students. We've known for 3 months that it's a huge influx of migrants coming, and we've had a pretty good idea that whether they were housed at the Interim Conference Center or somewhere else, a good number was coming to Lowell. How frustrating is it for you to still not know, or do you honestly not know how many students are coming into the Lowell Public Schools as we sit here today on November 15th?
I honestly don't know. So I don't know, and I have no proper information on it. What we do sometimes, and among the central office staff, we've collaborated to make some contingency plans for that. We count how many rooms there are in the Interim Conference Center, and we estimate how many people could fit in them. And if it's 200 families, how many students might that be? But it's all guesswork. And so there's suggestions that the immigrants will have primarily very young students. In fact, many of them will be preschool and not be part of the system right off, but many of them will be entering our schools.
Okay. So with that said, what are the challenges that you're going to face, assuming that you have some kind of an influx? I know in talking to your transportation director, Johnny Dakota, for a city council article that I wrote, that his concern is how do we transport them based on the fact that the Interim Conference Center busing means there's only certain schools they can go to, and that those schools are generally crowded as is. Is that your biggest issue? Is it having enough staff to work with whatever the influx is? Is it having the funding to meet the challenges? What are you concerned about today?
Well, in some respects, it's all of those things. Not all of them, not all of the logistics are difficult. For example, feeding them. We have the capacity to feed them. We know that. That's a good thing. It's a basic need. We can, not that we don't have to prepare for it, but we're confident that we can do that. But then transportation, as John Dakota highlighted, it's a concern today, before we receive more students, right? And so our planning involves trying to use the services and, for example, the transportation that we already have. The Inn and Conference Centre is part of what we call Zone 2. In Lowell Public Schools, it's in Zone 2. And so the bus routes can be arranged to use the Zone 2 buses for these students to go to schools. That means they will primarily go to Zone 2 schools, or what we call citywide schools. We can make those arrangements. There are places for students in those schools. It does depend. If you ask me, so you're telling me you can accommodate 100 new students? I'd say absolutely. Grades 1 to 8, for example. Yeah, 100 students, grades 1 to 8, if they're evenly spread out, no trouble. It does become an issue that we don't know what grade levels the students will be, nor the number. So what if it's 200? What if it's 300? And what if they're primarily grades 1 and 2 and so on? We would then have more difficulty. It would be more challenging.
How will the funding work? There's been a lot of discussion around this. I've been told for a while now, it's been well known that any community bringing in students is going to get $104 a day per student, which I did some quick math. I had to use a calculator. I can't do it in my head, but 180 school days, $104 brings you about to a level of what it costs for the city of Lowell to educate an English language learner. So are you comfortable that you will have the funding there for this year in 2023 going into 2024 in January?
It's helpful that there's funding. It's not the only need that we have, but so it's helpful that there's funding. There have been times in the past where we've received students without funding, and we've had to get on with it. So it's helpful that there's funding. I don't know today what the mechanism will be for Lowell Public Schools to actually get that funding in hand, right? But even when it is in hand, and assuming that it's a reasonable amount of money, you are correct. $104 per day adds up to about what it costs us to educate students in Lowell Public Schools. So that's fair. But what if the money needs to be used to add some new bus routes? And we don't have enough buses, and we don't have enough bus drivers. What if the money needs to be applied to adding some new teachers, and we can't, even if we can recruit and hire those teachers, that'll take some time. So there will be challenges associated with it. I do think overall we're in a really good position to meet those challenges because of terrific staff we have in our schools already, because of looking at the enrollment figures and having some spaces where these students can go. We'll be able to hit the ground running, and then I think we'll need to look at it and make some adjustments possibly going forward.
Okay, so the immediate influx, you're hopefully going to get that money. It appears that you're getting close to the money that you'll need. How will it work in 2020, the academic year 2024, 2025? Because there is a kind of a cutoff period, right? October 1st or October 31st, where whoever's in your system, you get funding for them, and then that kind of goes into your next year's allotment, correct? Is it your understanding that 104 will continue for the 1 year minimum going forward, potentially 2 years of these students being in the Lowell school system? Or does, does that all disappear come next October of 2024?
So I think the $104 per day is being provided because we're after October 1. And so if we didn't get money coming with these students, they wouldn't be counted and we wouldn't get funding. But in addition to the October 1, there's another date in March where the school, the Department of Education checks in on us about our enrollment and does a mid-year correction. And so by March, those students will be in our district, they'll be enrolled in our schools. And so we can have a reasonable assurance that all those students will count and will be part of the budget funding that we receive.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about your high school football coach. You folks had released a statement that there was an investigation going on. We had reported there was some kind of an incident in practice where a player was hurt and an investigation was ongoing. I heard you announce on the radio. I listened to your WCAP radio interviews. I heard you announce that Coach Cullen will indeed be on the sidelines for their game against Chelmsford, and he's been on the sidelines every week since, to my understanding. What is the status of the football coach?
Can I turn the tables on you, Teddy?
Sure.
If the coach is on the sidelines for those games, what conclusion do you draw from that?
So that's my point. There was never a formal announcement that he was cleared of any wrongdoing in this incident, yet the fact that he is on the sidelines leads me to believe that whatever investigation, whatever the particulars were, the investigation concluded he didn't do anything wrong or negligent, or, I've heard up to potentially criminal, and there would be legal action coming. Can you say at this point that Coach Cullen was cleared of any wrongdoing?
So I can tell you that any instance in our schools where student well-being, students' education, students' comfort even is of consideration deserves to be treated appropriately, looked into, and provided for. And that has happened in all instances, including the one that you're referring to. In other words, any investigation or any action that needed to be taken was done so appropriately, thoroughly. But I also can't directly address a matter that involves one individual person. That's not something we can do other than to give you a solid assurance everything has been dealt with appropriately and thoroughly, and the appropriate actions have been taken.
Okay. Mold issues at the Pawtucketville Memorial School. They were chatting about that on the radio this morning, much to your chagrin. I listened to the Jerry Nutter and crew an awful lot. My understanding is there's a bunch of parents who are lined up to speak at tonight's school committee meeting. This is the school where there was a one-day delay at the start of the year, right? Because there was some issues and you had to do some remediation. Is it the same school that we're talking about here?
Yes, we're talking about the Pawtucket Memorial School, Pawtucketville Memorial School.
Okay. A lot of people who work at that school and parents have said to me there've been issues with mold even since that time, even though it was kind of given the all clear to go back to school. Are there problems there with the air quality?
So I've been shown articles from the Lowell Sun going back to 2007. And I'm concerned about that. And I know that our facilities department is concerned about that. And again, taking appropriate action, including and especially in working with city officials, in contracting with companies to do regular air quality testing, which, by the way, when we receive the results, we immediately share out with the community, meaning all of the school, the school staff and the school principal and so forth receive the results of air quality testing at the same time that I do. We're being very transparent about our concerns about that school, and we're addressing them thoroughly.
Okay. Is the air quality where it should be?
The air quality is being tested. If it wasn't where it should be, we wouldn't have students or staff be in a place where they're in danger. I will say, Teddy, that it's tricky, and here's why it's tricky. I bet if we had the air quality testers come to your house this afternoon, they would find a place in your house where there are mold spores, probably in your basement, right? And so there are mold spores everywhere, indoors and out. If you're outside on a muggy day, or if you're in your backyard at some point, sometimes you see a mushroom growing. In certain conditions, there are lots of mold spores that are naturally in the environment. Some of us, myself included, I take an allergy pill once in a while. Some of us sniffle a lot, right? And so there are different reactions that different people have to those mold spores. They are not present in any school to the degree that is dangerous or that is unwarranted. I'm saying that not based on my expertise. I've worked with the health department on it. That does not mean that one school or another doesn't have higher mold in one place or another than another school. We're addressing it. We are addressing it very conscientiously, openly and transparently.
Okay. And lastly, let's talk a little bit about hiring practices and the independent investigation. I saved the best for last for some folks. There are a lot of questions about that. People asking, what happened to this report? I mean, we were moving heaven and earth, or at least trying to move heaven and earth to get a report. There was dismay and consternation that some people were, quote unquote, trying to block that report. And then suddenly your predecessor left and nobody seemed to care about the report or hiring practices. Where do we stand today on that investigation? Why don't we have our answers?
The report, I believe, is just about complete and will be presented to the school committee within the next couple of weeks, is my expectation. Some of the response to that, Teddy, is that, I have not been directly involved. In other words, not able to be involved because you can't interfere with an investigation. You have to let it go ahead. I am looking forward to the report, in part because I'm hoping, if nothing else, it provides us with a set of recommendations to make, I have my biases here, I want to make our hiring practices more fair and equitable, but also more efficient, more nimble. When we have openings, we want everyone who's eligible for jobs to be considered, but we also need to make hires and not have it be a huge, cumbersome process that puts us back on finding a teacher for a classroom for 6 weeks and so on, right? So I'm looking forward to the report. I've not been directly involved in it. I know that I can tell you that part of the delay or the time it's taken for that report to be released is making sure that it is signed off on correctly, that we pay for it from the correct accounts and so forth, and that the city's law office approves of what we're doing. We're following every step appropriately and as we should, and that has taken some time. I believe the report is due within the next couple of weeks to be released.
All right. There's been speculation that the reason we don't have the report is because you don't have it yet because it hasn't been paid for. Is there any truth to that?
I think as part of my previous answer, I was indicating that the report is being paid for, but in order to pay for it, you can't just say that report is ready and they want their payment before they release it. Can you just find some money somewhere and pay them so we can get the report today? It doesn't work that way. There are certain codes with certain accounts that are deliberately set aside for certain costs. We need to make sure that we're taking the funds from an appropriate area. We need to make sure that the city agrees with how we're paying for it and that the law office at the city agrees with how we're paying for it. So we've taken those steps, and in order to do that well and to do it properly, you have to take the time to do that.
I know this predates your time at the helm, but wasn't that process of how it's going to be paid for, wasn't that already figured out? Did the bill come in higher than was budgeted for? Is that what the issue is at this point?
I'm happy. I hope, Ted, we've many occasions to have conversation like this, and I can tell you and your listeners, I'm happy to be put on the spot and be made accountable to respond. I can't respond to anything that was before my time. It would be unfair because I wouldn't know. Okay.
And lastly, on this subject, you were your job. You were the head of the principals, correct? Did that entail making hiring decisions and principals?
Yes.
Okay, so theoretically, you could be part of this report and part of this investigation. From your knowledge, are there problems there? Are there ways to make the hiring practices better so that there aren't the he said, she said issues of I should have gotten the job over so-and-so and whatnot? Because I've kind of delved into this. I've talked to some of the people involved. They've come on. School committee member Doherty has come on. Kara Pigeon, one of the people at the heart of the hiring practices investigation, she has come on and talked to us. And it just kind of seems to me there's so much ambiguity and so much leeway in who you can hire and what the process is that it lends itself to these type of situations all the time. Can these practices be improved? Not that anyone did anything wrong. We don't know that, but if the system is set up to at least make so many judgment calls, then you're really kind of setting yourself up for disaster in a school system as big as Lowell's.
Right, Teddy. I'm looking forward to the report because I think our systems can improve. Not that they weren't appropriate to begin with, but I think, as indicated earlier, I want the system of hiring to be fair and equitable. I want us to attract a more diverse workforce to Lowell, so our teachers and staff look like the students in front of them. But I also want it to be nimble, and I'm looking forward to the report for those for those recommendations. I can tell you that policy should provide for most of that. But I also can tell you that ultimately you make a decision about who to hire. And you asked about principals and problems in schools and so on. I can tell you this, that principals in schools are trying to find the very best staff that they can find and hire them. If we took a case of someone who's fully qualified for a job, applies for a job, has all the certifications, the licenses and so forth, and isn't hired, not hired for that job, and they apply for another job that they're qualified for, still not hired. If that person is my cousin I'll come here and speculate that my cousin has been treated unfairly and the bias is going, and they don't want to hire him for whatever particular reason. If that same individual is Teddy Panos' buddy, right? Or sorry, let's say if the principal of the school is Teddy Panos' buddy, you're going to argue that the principal is making the best choice and the sensible choice for what's needed in the school. In other words, there ultimately is some judgment involved. There should be clear policy. We should be held accountable to follow it. I believe that that's been the case, and I hope that it continues to be the case. But there is some judgment involved. If a person is fully qualified for a position and doesn't get hired, we can look at who was hired and why that person was hired. People that are fully qualified and licensed for positions might have any number of reasons that they're not suitable candidates.
One of the things that I understand is that because of COVID, that there were certain situations where the state would grant waivers, or the Department of Education would grant waivers, meaning someone who may not have reached the maximum level of qualifications prior to COVID is now qualified. Is that a fair practice in your estimation? And more importantly, are we at a point now in the number of teachers who have returned to work and are going into schools and trying to get into that field where, and other educational professionals, not just teachers, but are we at a point now where that will no longer be an issue and waivers will not be required to have enough people to hire?
So if you ask about the emergency licensure and if that's fair, it's necessary. It was necessary across Massachusetts and to a greater extent across the country, much greater extent in some communities. There is a huge lack of staff. They find it difficult to find enough teachers for classrooms. I believe we've had some really terrific recruitment processes in Lowell and really hard work on behalf of the HR in Lowell and various principals and others to be creative about recruiting so that we filled our openings. And I think there's credit for that. But it's also true, yes, the Department of Education gave certain people emergency licenses, and they told us to treat them as they would any other candidate. In other words, if you and I went for a job, Teddy, and I have an emergency license and your license happens to be the regular one that used to exist, the employer cannot discriminate against one or another of us because one of us has an emergency license. It's considered to be a valid license.
All right. Liam Skinner, Superintendent of Lowell Schools. You survive okay? You're willing to come back?
I would love to talk about the work. There's much more of it I'd like to tell you more about. So thank you for this opportunity. I'll be happy to come back.
Awesome. I look forward to doing it on a regular basis. I promise I won't take up close to an hour of your time, but there's a lot to talk about it there, and I'm really interested in getting into some of the educational components more than the political ones that we hit a lot of them this time.
Well, I feel like that we've used our time well. I hope your viewers have find value in it. I'm happy to do it, and particularly if it's of service to the community. Thank you for having me on.
All right, great to have you here. Liam Skinner, Interim Superintendent of Lowell Schools, joining us here on Inside Lowell. Inside Lowell, as we like to say. If Lowell is your home, this is your place. Till next time, be safe, everybody.